Victor, welcome to the program. Can China play a constructive role in diffusing this crisis?
Thank you very much for having me. Yes, indeed, China is playing a very important and constructive role right now when war has already broken out. And this war was not started by Iran. It is started by Israel, coupled with the United States. So the United States and Israel are engaged in this war of aggression against Iran, violating Iran's sovereignty and territorial integrity. And the Chinese government emphasized that Iran's sovereignty and territorial integrity should be fully respected. And China is calling for de-escalation and ceasefire immediately, because otherwise you do not know how much evil this whole situation may degenerate in, because this may degenerate into a regional war or even with more global implications, because first of all, energy security will be undermined, and it may also lead to a big financial crisis. So the world itself will suffer the consequences of this unwanted war launched by the United States and Israel against a sovereign country. And Iran is now exercising full right of self-defense against the aggressors.
So Victor, what about when it comes to international law and UN Charter? Do these military actions by US and Israel violate those?
Absolutely. I think in this particular case, Israel committed act of aggression against Iran, and the United States aided and abetted Israel and joined in this act of aggression against Iran. By international law, there should be no doubt that Iran is under attack and is suffering the consequences of this aggression. And I think Iran has full justification to fight back. Now, several countries, including Prime Minister of Britain, said Iran has been attacking several other countries. It's because these countries host US military bases. And from these military bases, acts of aggression has been committed by the US troops and military facilities based in these countries. And I think by international law, Iran has full justification to strike back. But of crucial importance is what China is calling for: de-escalation and ceasefire, and go back to the negotiation table. It is truly a double standard for the United States to engage in negotiation all the time until the moment they struck at Iran. So I think this has destroyed and undermined the trust the United States need to possess as a major power.
Yeah, you make a good point, because the last time Israel and United States hit Iran, they were also in the middle of negotiations back in June, with the Omanis playing the role of the mediators. And Oman's foreign minister gave a number of interviews, and he said he was optimistic that the two sides could work something out and avert a military crisis. Let me move on to the United Nations Security Council. What can we expect from the UNSC? What should we expect? And can they at this point really do anything? Victor, you know, there's a lot of people that say the UN has become rather irrelevant. They say a lot of things, but nothing really ever happens.
Well, I think the United Nations Security Council need to come into an immediate emergency session right away to deliberate about this particular war of aggression against Iran. However, I don't think it is realistic to expect anything substantive coming out of the Security Council, because the United Nations will definitely exercise its veto power. We tend to blame the United Nations for the deadlock, for the inefficiency. However, allow me to emphasize, the United Nations, especially the Security Council, have at least performed well in preventing the outbreak of a third world war. To that extent, I think, despite of all its imperfections, the United Nations, including the Security Council, have done its job. And I hope what Israel and the United States are doing right now, committing acts of aggression against Iran, will not lead to regional conflict or even global warfare. which may eventually lead to the Third World War.
What damage was likely done to Iran's military and nuclear infrastructure back in June, Victor? You probably remember the Trump administration repeatedly told us Iran's nuclear program was obliterated. So my question to you is whether this time around, is it still about Iran's nuclear and military capabilities, or is it about something else?
Well, first of all, as far as the Middle East is concerned, it is completely unacceptable for one country, that is Israel, to have developed the nuclear weapons and sometimes to declare their intention to use nuclear weapons, and at the same time to deny another country, which is Iran, a sovereign country with its own independence, from developing nuclear weapons. Now, Iran has repeatedly reaffirmed that it has no intention to develop nuclear weapons, but it has the right to use nuclear power for peaceful purposes. So I think this whole issue needs to be brought to a negotiation table, and there was an international agreement covering the peaceful use of nuclear power by Iran, but the United States chose to walk out of that agreement, which eventually led to the war and configuration we are faced with as we speak. So I think it is time for the United States to really do what a major power is supposed to do, to exercise its leadership and statesmanship, to engage in peaceful negotiation rather than resorting to war, especially United States should refuse to be misguided by Israel and its prime minister, and refused to be used as an instrument by Israel and Prime Minister Netanyahu in using the U.S. military power to commit acts of aggression against Iran. I don't think the American people want to fight a war against the Iranian people, and I hope things will go back to normal and de-escalation will happen, and the United States will really think twice before they pull the trigger, including when they are misled by another country, in this case, Israel, and especially its Prime Minister Netanyahu, in taking advantage of the U.S. military power to invade and committing acts of aggression against Iran.
Victor, my final question to you is the relationship between China and the United States is often described as the most important bilateral relationship in the world. Is this crisis going to affect that relationship?
Well, China-U.S. relations are the most consequential and impactful bilateral relations in the world of today. I think, and I believe, China has the ability to compartmentalize many different issues. So we condemn such acts of aggression. We condemn the violation of sovereignty and territorial integrity of Iran by Israel and the United States. On the other hand, I think there are channels between China and the United States to keep talking with each other and make sure that there are no issues between China and the United States which may flare up into uncertainty and uncontrollability, for example. And China and the United States will need to deal with each other on equal terms. And I hope China and the United States will eventually agree that war should be the last resort rather than the first resort, and negotiations should not be used as a disguise for launching a war against a sovereign country. I think from the Chinese philosophy, war should always be the last resort. And it seems that the United States under President Trump is eager to use war to solve problems, which may turn out to be unsolvable if you use war. These issues can be better resolved if you use peace and use diplomacy. Never lose patience about peace and negotiation, and never go to pull the trigger on a sovereign country and independent country, especially a country like Iran, which has about 5,000 or even 6,000 years of civilization.
Yes, China and Iran, both two of the oldest civilizations in the world. Victor Gao, I know it's very early morning in Beijing, so we really appreciate you staying up and talking to us.